No. I thought somebody stole them. They stole them a couple of years in advance. But I had to fix the mason and stuff. I wonder if they just didn't get their pollen. We had a weird rain on the grape on the neighborhood. Yeah. They got
pass these around? It goes this way. And you pass those around that way. If you're here with somebody, just take one. I don't know if there's enough for everybody.
I'll take one.
You can go online onto my website. By the way, if anybody wants to work on my cards, you can go on my cards. Got my website listed on here. I'm Paul Vossen. I work for the University of California. And cover Sonoma and Marin Counties. And my job basically is to help farmers do the right thing. So it's a combination of research and education. And I got involved in the olives about 20-something years ago. Became the de facto olive oil expert in California because nobody else was doing it. And at that time, most of the production was on the coast here. In fact, Bruce Cohn and Greg Reisinger, who worked here, was one of the original board members of the California Olive Council. I was one of the founders of the California Olive Council. I wrote a chapter for the olive production manual, and then Joe already mentioned that I wrote a little leaflet, or it's a manual on organic olive production. So I've done a lot of work on olive fruit fly control, some stuff on pruning, a lot of stuff on olive oil processing, olive oil sensory evaluation. I started the California taste panel. I still have a taste panel that we do for research. We taste oils for research purposes. For example, olive fruit fly control, one of the control measures is a spray that's called kale and clay, which is a white kind of clay stuff that prevents the fly from, everybody get one? We did some work where we wanted to see whether the kale and clay would wash off, it would affect the flavor of the oil. We did that kind of research. Also, I did some very interesting research on the amount of olive fly damage you can tolerate before it affects the flavor. And how many of you guys have olive fruit fly problems? We can talk about that in a minute. Let's do pruning first. If we want to, at the end, we'll talk about olive fly stuff. Okay? And then there's processing and varieties and rootstocks and fertility, and I can talk about the whole schmear. But what I wanted to show you here is that this is what olive trees will do if you just let them go. Now they prune these a little bit. They come in and open them up. So looking at well, this is an ornamental tree. It could be like an oak tree or an elm tree or whatever it is, because they're in the picnic area and stuff. And of course, their main objective here is to sell wine. And so it's a picnic area. But they also, out over in there, since it's not quite as ornamental, there's different degrees of ornamentalness here. They have pruned those more for production. But why don't you take a look at this one? If you had these trees and you were interested in production, what you would do is come in here with a chainsaw and cut it off right there. And the reason is because the growth occurs where you make the cut. If you look at this and you look at the other trees in places where they have cut them, within 2 inches of that cut is where the shoots grow. So if I want growth here, I got to cut it there. I mean, it just has to be. And so if I wanted to start a new tree over and have it nice and low, so that it's not more than about 10, 12 feet tall and easy to pick and all that kind of stuff, that's what I would have to do. And of course, they're not going to do that here. Because then you got a bunch of ugly stumps, and it's not part of what they're doing. But if you were in that situation, that's maybe what you would do. So you can see some trees here. That first one here is showing the woman there. The trees were chopped at about 10, 12 feet. So that's what they did out here. About in that area, 8, 10, 12 feet is where they did a lot of that. And you can see the growth just kind of goes up above that, and it's still too tall. And if you look at the other one where I'm standing there, that was actually when I was young and handsome. That's in Spain. And they planted 3 trees in one that went up this upper right there. They planted 3 trees in one area because it's a real dry area. And then they come by about every 10 to 12 years with a chainsaw, and they just cut one of those 3 off to the stud. and it'll grow, and then next year they come and cut another one.
Are you going to need any tools
to
or
a stub,
anything?
and then it'll grow. The next year they come and cut another one, they've got sort of a progression.
Process or
And then they never lose all of
you
their
want our
production.
guys to prune the tree while they want.
But then they end up with a tree that's
Yeah.
about 10 feet.
So if he's going to go show
Bloody
them how to
hell.
do one, do we want to have our guys there to do the tree?
So that's,
One of them.
and then you can see some of the one that's just down below that. You can see where those cuts were made. And those cuts, they actually had some branches in a lower tree, and they cut into those big branches. You can see the growth that you get out of it. And then you get 8, 10, 12 branches all from one spot. So you select 2 or 3 out of that, which is what this next one is over here on the lower left. So left 2 on each one. So now you've started the tree over completely, but at a much lower level and much more. And then you see this one down to the lower right. This kind of shows that after about 15 years, what that tree would end up being. Okay. So I realize most of you don't have this, but kind of interesting. Okay, now the other one is more of probably what you do have. And there's 2 scenarios here. The top one is a tree that you see how open that is. That's what you ultimately would like to have, about 3 or 4 scaffold branches like that. You see the pile of foliage on the ground? Half of my tree's on the ground. They just cut off half of my production. So it wouldn't be something that I would recommend you do. I did it to demonstrate, you show and take a picture, and show you the form of the tree you're trying to get, but you don't want to do it all in 1 year. In fact, what you'd like to do is do it over about 6 years. The reason for that is that most of the energy in an olive tree is stored in the leaves. It's not like apples or peaches or things like that, where you cut them back, you get this, a lot of the carbohydrates are stored in the trunk and in the roots. You cut them back and they take off and just grow like crazy in the spring. Well, olives will do that a little bit, but have you heard of summer pruning on fruit trees? On other fruit trees like peaches and apples? Okay. We do summer pruning on those, and we cut leaves off because it stunts the trees, because they're too big. That's why we do summer pruning. Well, this is always summer pruning because they're always evergreen. So we're always going to stunt the trees when they've got leaves on them. So consequently, when you have a small tree and you prune it, particularly if you prune it severely, you're actually stunting the tree. So we tell most people who planted new trees to have their partner, their wife, their girlfriend, their friend, take the pruning shears. Turn your cell phones off.
Dance party.
Take the pruning shears and lock them up in a safe somewhere. Turn this off. Lock them up in a safe somewhere, and then about 3 or 4 or 5 years later, then go get your pruning shears off. Because the temptation is, oh, I want to prune these and have them all look real nice and start them off real young, and all you're doing is stunting the trees. What you want to do for production purposes is get the trees to grow, fill their space, and then slow down. And so I would like to get 3 feet of growth on a tree on a young tree. And you can if you do it right. Good weed control, a little bit of nitrogen fertilizer, some irrigation water, and your olive tree should grow at least 3 feet in 1 year. If you don't control the weeds, you're going to get half that or a quarter of that. If you don't give them enough irrigation water, you're going to get much less. And actually, fertilizer is probably one of the things that is people think it's much more important than it really is. You want to have adequate fertilizer, but putting fertilizer on doesn't really make that much difference. So the other thing I want to say is that fruit trees, light penetrates into a tree about 3 feet in each direction. So normally what we do on wider spaced trees, which is I kind of assume a lot of what you have on the basis of what you said, which would be trees spaced 15, 16, 18, 20 feet apart, is you want to end up with an open center tree. It looks nice, it's the easiest way to prune them, it's the natural form of the tree, and those trees, ultimately we can keep them at about anywhere from 10 to 12 feet apart. Lower than that's difficult, more difficult, but it's kind of a natural form, so it's easy to do. But if you could just think for a minute, if I've got a tree that's 4 feet wide, I've got good light penetration through the whole thing, I don't need to open it up. I don't need to prune it. Until it gets about 7 feet wide, and I think that's what I said here, until it gets about 7 feet wide, I'm starting to get some shading in the middle, then I come in and start cutting some branches out in the middle. By that time, you've probably got a jungle and you can't even see what's in there. You got to stick your head in there and go, oh, what's in there? And you just take a handsaw, you just cut a couple of the interior branches out and open it up a little bit. So if you look at that bottom one there, the tree kind of in the center of the picture is unpruned, and the one off to the left is pruned. You can't hardly tell, right? And that's the amount of branches that we took out of it. I think it was 1 or 2 branches. So that's what you want to do. You want to just, every once in a while, go in, open it up a little bit, and maintain the center open. Now you could, if you wanted to, do it like we did up here, but you're going to really stunt the tree, and you're going to lose a lot of production. So, with that, let's walk back over there, and we'll talk about those trees.